My name is Rosalind Griffin. I am 34 years old. I mitigate risk for a living. As a senior actuarial consultant, I calculate the exact pressure required to collapse a system, and I build firewalls to stop it. Last Saturday morning, I was sitting in my kitchen in Stamford, Connecticut, drinking coffee in the house I spent 8 years saving for. Then my phone lit up with a group text from my mother. It said, "Sell your house by Tuesday. Derek needs $180,000 for the wedding, and we found a cash buyer." Below the text were 3 attachments: a signed contract for a luxury country club, a receipt for a custom 3-carat diamond ring, and a confirmed itinerary for an overwater villa in the Maldives. I stared at the screen. But the text was not the part that made my blood run cold. What my father said 5 minutes later was. And what I did that night quietly while they were sleeping, none of them saw coming. Welcome back to Cutie Told Stories, where the daughter expected to pay the bill is usually the one auditing the ledger. Tell me your age in the comments and hit subscribe, because if you have ever been the family ATM, you need to hear how this ends. I read my mother's message again. I did not blink. I did not cry. That is the thing about my profession. When disaster strikes, you do not panic. You look at the numbers. The numbers told a clear story. My younger brother Derek was 30 years old and accustomed to a life he could not afford. Growing up, the division of labor in our household was simple. Derek received the safety net, and I was expected to be the safety net. When his tech startup failed, my parents handed over their retirement savings. When he needed a luxury vehicle to look like a successful founder, they co-signed the lease. Now he wanted a 6-figure wedding to impress his fiancée, Courtney, and my parents had decided my deed was the required collateral. I did not type a paragraph explaining my feelings. I did not call them to argue about fairness. I tapped out 3 words and hit send. Not a chance. I set the phone face down on the granite island and took a sip of my coffee. It took less than 5 minutes for the retaliation. My phone vibrated, a direct message from my father, Warren. He did not bother with a greeting. He wrote, "Sign the transfer papers we are emailing you, or you are disowned. You are not going to humiliate your brother in front of Courtney's wealthy family." I stopped breathing for a fraction of a second. The escalation was wrong. My father was a man of careful moves. He did not issue absolute ultimatums over a simple real estate refusal. You do not threaten to erase your own daughter from the family unless the money is already spent or the lie is already told. He mentioned transfer papers they were emailing me. That meant they already had documents drawn up. My actuarial training took over. Risk assessment. If they had papers ready, how far had they actually gone? I opened my laptop on the kitchen counter. I did not check my email. I logged directly into my primary banking portal, the one tied to my mortgage. I bypassed the checking and savings tabs and navigated straight to the property deeds and associated lines of credit. The page loaded slowly. While the loading icon spun, I thought about what this house meant to me. It was a 2-bedroom colonial with a wraparound porch. I bought it on my own at 26. I worked 60 hours a week analyzing mortality tables and corporate liability risks, while my friends were taking weekend trips to Tulum. Every hardwood floor and painted cabinet in this place was paid for by my own discipline. My parents had never contributed a single dollar to my mortgage. Yet here they were, carving it up like a turkey to serve to my brother. Derek had always been the golden child. He was handsome and charismatic and incapable of holding a steady job. Courtney, his fiancée, was the daughter of a Greenwich real estate developer. She was accustomed to a certain lifestyle. Derek had spent the last 2 years convincing her and her parents that he was a highly successful entrepreneur. He was playing a dangerous game of pretend, and my parents were funding the illusion. The banking page finally refreshed. I stared at the screen and felt the temperature in the room drop. Right beneath my primary mortgage, under my active accounts, sat a newly pending item. Inquiry for a home equity line of credit. Status pending signature verification. Requested draw $180,000. My parents had not just asked me to sell my house. They had already forged an application to leverage my equity without my knowledge. They were trying to extract the exact amount they needed for the wedding straight out of my walls. I sat very still. The coffee in my mug went cold. The group text from my mother was not a request. It was a cover-up. They needed me to sell the house quickly because they needed to hide the fact that they had already committed bank fraud in my name. The sheer audacity of it was suffocating. But beneath the shock, a different feeling started to take root. A cold, calculated clarity. My father thought I would panic. He thought the threat of being disowned would make me fold. He forgot what I do for a living. I find the flaw in the system, and looking at that pending loan application, I realized my family had just handed me the exact flaw I needed to burn their entire system to the ground. I picked up my phone. I did not dial my parents. I did not text my father back to fight about his threat of disownment. I turned the device over, read the toll-free customer service number printed on the back of my bank card, and typed it into the keypad. The automated system answered. A synthetic voice asked me to state the nature of my call. I said the word fraud. The system routed me through a maze of security questions. I entered my social security number, my zip code, and my secure PIN. The hold music played for 3 minutes. I sat on my kitchen stool and monitored my own pulse. It was steady. In my profession, when a financial model collapses, risk assessors do not cry over the broken pieces. We isolate the variables. We secure the perimeter. Right now, my family was the active threat, and my life was the perimeter. A representative named Simon answered the line. He worked in the Specialized Fraud Prevention Unit. I verified my identity using a rotating code sent to my Secure Authenticator app. Once I cleared the security protocol, I told him there was an unauthorized credit inquiry tied to my residential property. Simon typed on his end. The sound of his keyboard echoed softly through the receiver. He located the file. The home equity line of credit application had been submitted on Thursday, exactly 48 hours ago. It was not initiated online. It was physical paperwork scanned and uploaded through a local branch Dropbox. I asked Simon to email me a secure copy of the intake form while we stayed on the line. An encrypted email arrived in my inbox a minute later. I opened the PDF and scrolled past the standard loan terms and disclosure agreements directly to page 4, the signature line. I stared at the ink on the screen. The letters formed a shape that was intimately familiar. The capital R in my first name leaned a fraction too far to the left. The loop on the lower half of the G in my last name was pinched at the bottom. It was a careful, deliberate attempt. To a weary bank employee processing hundreds of digital files a day, it looked legitimate. But I had seen that exact penmanship my entire life. I had seen it on middle school field trip permission slips. I had seen it on notes excusing me from gym class. I had seen it on the inside of birthday cards. My mother had practiced my signature. She had sat at her dining room table, traced the letters of my name, and attempted to sign away the equity in my home. The sheer calculation required to forge a signature on a federal banking document took my breath away for a fleeting second. Then the cold logic returned. I gave Simon the order. I instructed him to initiate a hard lockdown on my entire financial profile. I did not want a temporary hold. I wanted a concrete wall. We went through the accounts one by one. Checking accounts, locked. Savings accounts, frozen. Investment portfolios, restricted. I placed a specific fraud alert on the title of the Stamford property, requiring verbal confirmation and a government-issued photo identification in person for any subsequent inquiries. Simon read the lengthy legal disclosures. His voice was steady and monotonous. I agreed to every clause. When I hung up with the bank, I opened 3 new browser tabs. Experian, Equifax, TransUnion. I placed a permanent security freeze on my social security number. I changed my banking passwords to 16-character alphanumeric sequences. I wiped my parents' saved devices from my streaming services, my retail accounts, and my digital life. I severed every invisible digital cord they might try to pull. You contain the breach before you investigate the origin. My phone screen lit up again. I expected another threat from Warren. The instinct of any normal person would be to call him back, to shout, to demand answers about the forged bank documents. But shouting surrenders control. Anger is a volatile asset. I chose silence. Silence is a mirror. It forces the opposition to look at their own panic. I knew that if I did not respond, my parents would assume I was crying, pacing, and crumbling under the weight of their disappointment. Let them think that. Let them proceed as if their plan was working. The new text was not from my father. It was from Derek, the golden child himself. He did not ask how I was doing. He did not apologize for the sudden demand to liquidate my home. He went straight to his practiced routine of emotional extortion. His message read, "Rosalind, please. Courtney is looking at floral arrangements today. Her friends all had destination weddings, and she expects perfection. If we do not secure the country club deposit by Tuesday, she is going to walk away. Do not do this to me. I need this to work." I read the message twice. The actuary in me flagged a discrepancy in his language. I need this to work. He did not say he loved Courtney and wanted to marry her. He said he needed the event to work. I looked back at the forged loan application on my computer screen. $180,000. That is a strange number for a wedding shortfall. If you are short on wedding funds, you usually need $20,000 or maybe $50,000 for a luxury event. You do not ask your sister to sell her entire house to cover a catered dinner and some imported orchids. You ask for a cash loan. The precision of the figure bothered me. $180,000 is not a budget estimate. It is an invoice. In my line of work, you learn that people lie, but public records do not. I poured my cold coffee down the sink and opened a fresh window on my browser. I navigated to the Connecticut Secretary of State Commercial Recording Division. Derek loved calling himself an entrepreneur. 2 years ago, he launched a logistics software company called Apex Distribution. My parents had hosted a lavish catered dinner to celebrate his incorporation. Derek had stood in our parents' living room wearing a tailored suit, holding a glass of expensive scotch, talking about venture capital and market disruption. He played the part of the visionary founder flawlessly. Courtney, the daughter of a wealthy Greenwich real estate family, had looked at him with pure admiration. Derek was playing a high-stakes game of pretend to keep her attention. I typed his name and the company name into the search bar. The results populated in neat, sterile rows. The operating status of Apex Distribution was not listed as active. It was listed as dissolved. But the corporate filings told a much darker story than a simple failed business. I clicked into the public documents section. There was a uniform commercial code lien filed by a commercial equipment lessor. There was a state tax warrant for unpaid payroll taxes. And there, filed just 14 days ago, was a summary judgment from a civil court in Hartford. I pulled up the court document and read the findings. It was a breach of contract lawsuit brought by his primary software developer. Derek had taken their work, failed to pay the invoices, and attempted to hide the remaining corporate assets. The judge had ordered Derek to pay restitution for defaulted services. The principal amount owed was $155,000. The legal fees and penalties tacked on by the court came to exactly $25,000. I did the math in my head. $155,000 plus $25,000. $180,000. I sat back against the kitchen stool. The air in the room felt thin. The luxury country club, the custom 3-carat diamond ring, the Maldives travel itinerary, those were all props. Courtney might believe they were real, but the money my parents were trying to extract from my house was never going to pay a florist. Corporate creditors do not just send angry letters. They freeze accounts. They garnish wages. They pursue the guarantor across state lines. Derek was drowning in legal debt and facing immediate asset seizure. My parents were orchestrating a fraudulent real estate transaction to bail him out before the court marshals showed up at his door. The wedding was nothing but a convenient smokescreen. They were using my house to keep him out of prison. and they were willing to destroy my entire future to do it. Silence is a weapon. When you deny a manipulator their expected reaction, they escalate. They cannot stand a vacuum, so they fill it with noise. I sat in my kitchen and watched the digital clock on the stove tick forward. 1 hour passed since I discovered the forged loan documents. My phone remained dark for exactly 62 minutes. I used that time to drink a glass of water and review my homeowner's insurance policies. I am an actuary. We prepare for the worst-case scenario, and then we prepare for the scenario that defies all statistical probability. When dealing with my family, the improbable was usually the baseline. Then the screen illuminated. It was not a direct message this time. Warren and Meredith had realized their solitary threats were failing. They needed reinforcements. They needed an audience to apply social pressure. A new group thread appeared. 12 participants. I recognized the numbers immediately. My parents had pulled in the extended family. Aunt Gail and Uncle Vince were the first to strike. Gail was my father's sister. She lived in a sprawling colonial in Ridgefield and spent her days managing a country club social calendar. She valued appearances over substance. Vince was a retired corporate litigator who treated every family dispute like a cross-examination. They were the self-appointed arbiters of the Griffin family reputation. If you fell out of favor with Gail and Vince, you were effectively excommunicated from holiday dinners and summer barbecues. They wielded invitations like weapons. Gail's message arrived in a block of rapid-fire text. Rosalind, we are appalled. Your parents just told us what you are doing to Derek. He is your brother. He is trying to build a life with Courtney, and you are hoarding your assets like a bitter woman. Selling that house is the least you can do after everything Warren and Meredith provided for you growing up. You have a good job. You can easily rent an apartment. Derek needs this capital to secure his future. Vince chimed in seconds later. Rosalind, you are acting entirely out of spite. Refusing to help your sibling in his hour of need reflects poorly on your character. Family requires sacrifice. Your parents are bending over backwards to ensure this wedding is a success, and you are throwing a tantrum over real estate. Do the right thing. Transfer the deed by Monday morning, or we will have a very serious conversation about your place in this family. I read the messages. The boulders of family guilt. In any other dynamic, these words would induce panic. They were designed to isolate me, to paint me as the jealous, unmarried sister trying to sabotage the handsome young groom's happiness. They did not know about the $180,000 court judgment. They did not know about the pending federal bank fraud. My parents had fed them a curated narrative. Rosalind is selfish. Rosalind is ungrateful. Rosalind is ruining the wedding. I watched the bubbles pop up on the screen as cousins and distant relatives added their 2 cents. Disappointing, heartless, cruel. One cousin suggested I owed Derek because he had always been so supportive of my career. A career he knew nothing about. It is a fascinating psychological phenomenon. When a toxic family system is threatened, the members will fiercely protect the parasite while attacking the host. Derek had drained my parents' resources for a decade. He had squandered every opportunity. Yet I was the villain for refusing to be his next meal. I did not feel sad. I felt like a scientist observing a predictable chemical reaction. I scrolled past the barrage of insults, but then my eyes caught a discrepancy, a stray pebble in the landslide of text. It was a message sent directly to me, outside of the group thread, from an unsaved number with a Greenwich area code. I opened it. The message read, Rosalind, darling, we are just so overwhelmed by your generosity. Courtney is in tears. Offering the proceeds of your home sale to fund the marital estate is the most beautiful wedding gift imaginable. We cannot wait to embrace you as family. Warmly, Lorraine Pierce, Courtney's mother. I stared at the screen. The air in the kitchen turned frigid. The scope of my parents' deception had just expanded beyond a simple financial bailout. They had not just lied to me. They had not just lied to Aunt Gail and Uncle Vince. They had built the entire foundation of this marriage on a spectacular fiction told to the wealthy in-laws. Derek and my parents had convinced the Pierce family that I was voluntarily liquidating my real estate portfolio to bless the union. They used my hard-earned stability to buy their way into Greenwich high society. Derek had likely spun a tale about how my actuarial consulting career was so lucrative that my Stamford house was just a starter property I no longer needed. He had promised his future in-laws an influx of capital. That was why Courtney was expecting the perfect wedding. She thought she was marrying into a family of substantial wealth. She had no idea her future husband was an unemployed fraudster dodging commercial creditors. She was a pawn in my parents' desperate game to maintain the illusion of success. I did not reply to Lorraine. I did not defend myself to Gail or Vince. I did what any meticulous risk assessor does when evaluating a critical liability. I documented the exposure. I took screenshots of every single message. I captured Gail's emotional blackmail. I captured Vince's legal posturing. I captured Lorraine's glowing gratitude. I archived the group chat and saved the images to a secure, encrypted cloud folder. I printed physical copies on my laser printer. I was building a ledger. Every text was a line item of their delusion. I needed an immaculate paper trail for what was coming next. The truth is fragile unless you back it up with hard data. Tell me in the comments. Have you ever been made the villain of a story simply because you refused to play the martyr? Have you ever watched your relatives orchestrate a smear campaign to protect the person who was actually doing the damage? Drop a yes below if you know exactly how heavy that silence feels. I set the phone down. The screen finally went dark. I thought I had contained the threat by freezing my bank accounts and placing the security alert on my property title. I assumed the forged home equity line of credit was their primary weapon. I thought the battlefield was confined to my real estate. I was wrong. At 2:15 in the afternoon, my phone rang. It was not a text message. It was a voice call. The caller identification displayed a local business in Fairfield County, La Maison Blanc Catering, one of the most exclusive event vendors in the state. I hesitated for a fraction of a second before accepting the call. A polite, urgent voice spoke through the receiver. "Am I speaking with Rosalind Griffin?" I kept my tone neutral. "Yes, this is Rosalind." The woman sighed, a sound of genuine professional distress. "Miss Griffin, I am calling from the billing department at La Maison Blanc. We are currently finalizing the floral arrangements and the vintage champagne order for Derek's wedding reception next weekend. I am so sorry to bother you on a Saturday, but the platinum credit card you placed on file for the guarantor deposit has just declined. We tried processing it twice, and the automated system flagged it for fraud prevention." I stood up from the kitchen stool. My mind raced through the data points. I had never spoken to this catering company. I had never signed a guarantor form. I certainly had not handed over my credit card information for vintage champagne or imported floral arrangements. The credit freeze I initiated earlier with Simon had functioned perfectly. It had blocked a transaction I did not even know existed. I kept my voice perfectly level. "What was the exact amount of the declined charge?" She replied, $15,000. "We need an alternate payment method today, or we cannot secure the imported orchids." I closed my eyes. The reality of the situation locked into place like a steel trap. The forged home equity application was just the beginning. My brother had not just conspired with my parents to steal my house to pay off his corporate lawsuits. He had physically weaponized my identity on the ground level. He had used my Social Security number to open a shadow credit account to pay for the wedding vendors. He was actively spending money in my name. I kept my voice perfectly level. "What was the exact amount of the declined charge?" She replied, $15,000. "We need an alternate payment method today, or we cannot secure the imported orchids." I asked the woman from La Maison Blanc to read me the last 4 digits of the card on file. She recited them. 4 numbers I did not recognize. A platinum card issued by a major financial institution. Derek had not just borrowed my good credit, he had stolen my identity to fabricate a parallel financial existence. I spoke clearly into the receiver. I told the billing representative to cancel the transaction. I informed her that the person who signed the guarantor agreement was not Rosalind Griffin. I stated that my Social Security number had been compromised and the card she was attempting to charge was a fraudulent account. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. The polite, professional demeanor of the catering representative fractured. She asked what I meant. I explained that any further attempts to process that account would be flagged by the Federal Fraud Registry. I advised her to freeze all services tied to the Griffin wedding immediately because the groom was operating on stolen funds. She hung up. I could almost hear the panic echoing through the catering office. High-end event planners do not tolerate financial ambiguity. They operate on strict margins and require guaranteed capital. I had just introduced a catastrophic liability into their ledger. I did not stop there. A risk assessor knows that a single leak indicates a compromised system. If Derek gave my stolen identity to the caterer, he had given it to the rest of the supply chain. I opened my laptop and searched for the Glenmore Country Club, the venue listed on the contract my mother had texted me hours earlier. I found the number for their private events department and dialed. A man named Gregory answered. He sounded cheerful, expecting a routine bridal inquiry. I did not give him a routine inquiry. I introduced myself and asked to speak to the accounting manager regarding the upcoming Griffin event. Gregory transferred me. A woman picked up. I delivered the same surgical message. I provided my legal name. I stated that any financial instruments bearing my signature or Social Security number were forged. I instructed them to halt all production, cancel the catering orders, and freeze the venue preparation. The accountant sounded breathless. She told me they had a $50,000 hold placed on a card matching my name for the final reception balance. I told her the card was void. I recommended she contact the groom directly for a valid payment method. I knew Derek did not have a valid payment method. His business was dissolved. His assets were targeted by a court order. He had nothing but the illusion my parents had funded. Next, I found The Florist, a boutique shop in Manhattan that charged premium rates for imported blooms. I made the third call. I repeated the procedure. Every call was a precision strike against my brother's carefully constructed facade. I was dismantling his fraudulent empire, one vendor at a time. The logistics of a luxury wedding are a fragile ecosystem. Without a verified flow of cash, the entire structure collapses in hours. After I finished notifying the vendors, I called the fraud department back. I navigated the security protocols and filed a formal dispute against the Shadow Platinum card. I requested an emergency trace on the origin of the application. The representative confirmed the account was opened online 3 weeks ago using my exact credentials. My parents possessed copies of my old tax returns from when I was in college. They had access to my Social Security number. They had simply handed my identity to Derek like a gift card. I set the phone on the granite counter. The kitchen was quiet. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the hardwood floor. I felt a strange sense of calm, the kind of calm that arrives when a complex equation finally balances. I had secured my borders. Now, I just had to wait for the enemy to realize they were locked out. I did not have to wait long. At 3:45, my phone rang. The screen displayed Derek's name. I let it ring 3 times. Let him feel the tension. Let him wait. On the 4th ring, I swiped the screen and answered. I did not say hello. I just listened. The voice on the other end did not belong to the smooth, charismatic tech founder. The polished veneer was gone. Derek was breathing hard. The sound was ragged and frantic. "What did you do?" His voice cracked on the final word. I kept my tone conversational. "I mitigated a risk, Derek." He unleashed a torrent of noise. He shouted that the country club had just emailed Courtney a termination notice. The caterer had frozen the menu selection. The florist had canceled the orchid shipment. Courtney was currently locked in the guest bedroom, crying because her mother was demanding answers. Derek accused me of destroying his life out of spite. He called me jealous. He said I was an ungrateful sister who could not stand to see him succeed. I let him run out of breath. I let him empty his arsenal of emotional manipulation. When he finally paused to inhale, I spoke. I am not ruining your life, Derek. I am just refusing to finance your felonies. The line went dead quiet. The word felonies hung in the air between us. It was a word he had been avoiding, a word my parents had buried under the guise of family loyalty. I continued. I pulled your public business filings. I know about the Uniform Commercial Code lien. I know about the unpaid payroll taxes. I know about the $155,000 civil judgment against Apex Distribution. You do not need wedding money. You need a bailout to stop the commercial marshals from seizing your non-existent assets. Derek stammered. He tried to construct a lie, but his brain could not process the fact that I held the data. You do not understand, he whispered. The investors backed out. The developers sued me. I just need a bridge loan. Mom and Dad said we could use your equity. It was only supposed to be temporary. I would pay you back when the new funding round cleared. There is no new funding round, Derek. You are bankrupt, and you committed identity theft to hide it from your future in-laws. Opening a credit card in my name is a federal crime. Forging a home equity line of credit is bank fraud. His panic shifted into genuine terror. He realized I was not playing a family dynamic game. I was playing a legal one. He dropped the golden boy persona entirely. He sounded like a frightened child. Rosalind, please, you cannot tell Courtney. If her father finds out about the civil judgment, he will force her to cancel the wedding. They care about reputation. They will ruin me in Greenwich. You ruined yourself, I replied. I am just refusing to pay the invoice. The desperation in his voice turned sharp, a cornered animal lashing out. You think you are so smart. You think you can just shut off the money and walk away. You do not know what you just did. Mom and Dad are furious. I am not afraid of them, Derek. You should be. His voice dropped to a menacing hiss. They know you blocked the vendors. They know you froze the bank accounts. Dad is losing his mind. He says you are embarrassing the family name. Let him say whatever he wants. He has zero leverage. Derek let out a bitter, frantic laugh. You think this is over. You think a few phone calls to a florist is going to stop this? They are not going to let you humiliate us. They are coming for you, Rosalind. I leaned against the kitchen island. What does that mean? It means you better unlock that front door. Mom and Dad are driving to Stamford right now. They are bringing the paperwork. Dad said if you will not sign it digitally, he will make you sign it in person. They are on their way to fix this. He ended the call. The dial tone hummed in my ear. I lowered the phone. The analytical distance I had maintained all afternoon shattered for a brief moment. The threat was no longer digital. It was no longer confined to group texts and forged PDFs. My parents were physically crossing county lines to confront me in my own home. They believed they could force my hand. They believed decades of conditioned obedience would override my instinct for self-preservation. I walked over to the front door and checked the deadbolt. It was locked. I checked the security camera feed on my digital panel. The driveway was empty. I had perhaps 30 minutes before their vehicle pulled up to my curb. I did not feel fear. I felt a profound, icy resolve. I walked back to the kitchen and poured myself a fresh glass of water. I stood by the window watching the road. My parents thought they were coming to fix a disobedient daughter. They did not realize they were walking into a trap of their own making. I watched the digital feed on my security panel. 28 minutes after Derek ended his frantic phone call, a silver Mercedes sedan turned onto my street. My father drove with a stiff, rigid posture. My mother sat in the passenger seat. There was a third figure in the back. The car idled at the curb before pulling sharply into my driveway. I recognized the third person the moment he stepped out of the vehicle. Arthur Penhaligon. He was a retired real estate broker and a permanent fixture at my father's country club. More importantly, he carried an active notary stamp in his leather briefcase. My parents had not come to my house to negotiate. They had come to execute a hostile takeover. I did not open the wooden front door. I kept it shut, leaving only the reinforced steel mesh screen door between us. The physical barrier was both symbolic and tactical. My father, Warren, was a man who believed physical presence dictated power. He was accustomed to dominating boardrooms and intimidating contractors. He used his height and his tailored suits to crush opposition before a word was even spoken. Standing on my porch in his weekend blazer, he expected me to open the door the moment his shadow fell across the threshold. I stood in the foyer. The house behind me was perfectly quiet. Warren cleared his throat. "Rosalind, open this door right now. We are putting an end to this ridiculous behavior." I kept my voice flat. The tone you use when reading a statistical variance. "The door stays closed, Warren. State your business." He flinched at the use of his first name. I had never called him Warren to his face. It stripped him of his paternal armor and reduced him to a hostile visitor on my property. Meredith pushed forward. She looked impeccable. Her hair was sprayed into place, and she wore a soft cashmere cardigan. The visual contrast to the financial violence she was orchestrating was jarring. "Stop acting like a spoiled child, Rosalind. You have caused enough damage for one day. We are here to fix the mess you made with the vendors. You are embarrassing this family." Warren gestured to Arthur. The retired broker pulled a thick stack of legal paper from his briefcase. He looked uncomfortable, but compliant. Warren was a powerful man in their social circle, and men like Arthur rarely questioned men like Warren. "We have drafted a quitclaim deed," Warren announced. He pointed at the documents. "You are going to transfer the title of this property into the Griffin Family Revocable Trust. It is the only way to bypass the security freeze you foolishly placed on the title this morning. Once the trust holds the deed, I can authorize the equity draw as the primary trustee and pay the caterers. Arthur is here to notarize your signature. We can have this handled in 5 minutes and salvage your brother's wedding." The audacity was a masterclass in entitlement. A quitclaim deed offers no warranties. It is a rapid transfer of ownership. They expected me to simply sign away a $500,000 asset on a Saturday afternoon to a man who just committed bank fraud. They viewed my house as an extension of their own wallet. They believed my labor existed solely to subsidize my brother's failures. I reached into my pocket and retrieved my smartphone. I opened the camera application and switched it to video mode. I pressed record. I held the lens right up to the steel mesh screen. Warren saw the red recording indicator. His jaw tightened. "Put that away, Rosalind." I said, "I am recording this interaction for my personal legal records. You are standing on my private property, demanding I sign over my deed. I want every word documented." Warren glared at the camera. He tried to maintain his authoritative posture, but the lens shifted the power dynamic. A camera is an objective witness. It does not care about paternal authority. Meredith, however, lacked his disciplined restraint. She despised being recorded. She despised losing control of the narrative even more. "Rosalind, this is absurd," she snapped. "We would not have to do this if you had just cooperated in the first place. You forced our hand." I kept the camera steady on her face. "Forced your hand to do what, Meredith? Forced your hand to forge my signature on a federal home equity application." Arthur took a step back. He was a shady notary, but he was not eager to be implicated in a federal crime on video. He clutched his briefcase against his chest. Meredith crossed her arms, her face flushed with righteous indignation. "I did not forge anything. I signed a document for my own daughter to facilitate a family transaction. It is family money anyway, Rosalind. You would not even have that house if we had not raised you and put you through school. We are entitled to use it to help your brother." There it was, captured in high-definition video with crystal clear audio. A verbal confession to bank fraud and identity theft, justified by toxic maternal entitlement. She genuinely believed that giving birth to me granted her a lifelong lien on my assets. The twisted logic was staggering, but it was exactly what I needed. I did not need to argue. The legal trap was now fully armed. I lowered the phone slightly but kept the recording active. "You just admitted to a felony on camera. Both of you are currently trespassing on my property. You have exactly 60 seconds to get back into your car and drive away. If you are still standing on my porch at the end of that minute, I am calling the Stamford Police Department and having you arrested." Arthur did not hesitate. He turned and walked briskly back to the Mercedes. He wanted no part of an escalating criminal dispute. He had signed up for a quick favor, not a police interrogation. Warren stood frozen. The veins in his neck pulsed. His authority had shattered against a simple steel screen and a smartphone. He leaned close to the mesh. His voice dropped to a venomous whisper. "You think you have won," he sneered. "You think you can humiliate us and just walk away. I know the senior partners at your actuarial firm, Rosalind. I play golf with your managing director. You require a pristine reputation to handle those corporate portfolios. If you do not sign this deed, I will make one phone call on Monday morning. I will tell them my daughter is suffering a severe mental breakdown. I will tell them you are stealing from your own family. I will ruin your career before lunchtime." I looked at him. The man who was supposed to protect me was threatening to destroy my livelihood to save a son who refused to work. A true actuary evaluates the weight of a threat based on the desperation of the person making it. Warren was out of options. 50 seconds, Warren. The police station is 3 miles away. He stared at me for a long, heavy moment. He searched my face for any sign of capitulation. He found nothing but cold math. He turned on his heel. He grabbed Meredith by the elbow and guided her down the concrete steps. They climbed into the Mercedes. The tires squealed as Warren accelerated away from the curb. I stopped the recording. The house was silent again. The adrenaline I had suppressed during the confrontation began to seep into my bloodstream. My hands felt cold. I walked into the kitchen and sat at the island. I had successfully defended the physical perimeter. I had the confession saved to the cloud. I had defeated their immediate tactical assault. But toxic systems do not operate solely in the physical realm. When manipulators lose control of the person they seek to control the narrative, I picked up my phone to check if Derek had sent any more frantic messages. Instead, I noticed a notification badge on my social media application. I rarely used Instagram. I maintained a private profile, mostly to keep up with industry contacts and a few college friends. Courtney, however, lived her entire life on a public grid. She cultivated an image of effortless wealth for an audience of thousands. I navigated to her page. She had uploaded a new post 5 minutes ago. My breath caught in my throat. The picture was a high-resolution photograph of my house. My Stamford Colonial with the wraparound porch and the mature oak tree in the front yard. It was an older photo, probably pulled from a real estate listing website, but the context was unmistakably current. Below the image was a caption written in bright, enthusiastic text. "Closing on our new marital home next week. Thank you to my amazing future in-laws for the most generous wedding gift a bride could ever ask for. I cannot wait to start my life with Derek in this beautiful space." She tagged Derek. She tagged my parents. The post already had 400 likes. Comments were pouring in from Greenwich socialites, congratulating her on the gorgeous property. The delusion had breached containment. It was no longer a private family lie whispered over dinner tables. My parents had publicly promised my house to the Pierce family. They had staked their entire social reputation on delivering a deed they did not own. They had convinced Courtney that the transaction was a finalized reality. The conflict had just gone public, and the stakes were no longer just financial. They were psychological. Derek and my parents had painted themselves into a corner where the only way out was to actually steal my home. I stared at the high-resolution photograph of my own front porch on a screen held in the palm of my hand. 20,000 strangers were currently liking, sharing, and commenting on a piece of real estate they believed belonged to a Greenwich socialite. The caption was a masterstroke of psychological manipulation. "Closing on our new marital home next week. Thank you to my amazing future in-laws for the most generous wedding gift a bride could ever ask for. I cannot wait to start my life with Derek in this beautiful space." Courtney was not the mastermind. She was the target audience. Derek and my parents had spun a narrative so flawless that she genuinely believed I was packing boxes and volunteering to vacate my sanctuary. She thought I was stepping aside to bless their union. The level of cognitive dissonance required to maintain that lie was staggering. My parents had effectively sold stolen goods to an unwitting buyer before they even possessed the inventory. They used my brick and mortar to build a fake kingdom for their favorite son. I set the phone face down on the counter. A quiet ache settled behind my ribs. It was not panic. It was grief. Toxic family systems operate on a rigid, twisted economy. They require a designated failure and a designated savior. The competent child is conditioned early. We are taught that our stability is a communal resource. We learn to absorb the impact when the golden child crashes the vehicle, ruins the credit score, or bankrupts the business. Our boundaries are treated as acts of treason. Growing up, Derek was handed the keys to a new sedan while I took the bus to a part-time retail job. Derek was given startup capital while I navigated high-interest student loans. My parents did not view my house as a testament to my hard work. They viewed it as a safety deposit box they had a right to crack open whenever Derek overdrew his account. I was never a daughter to them. I was an insurance policy, a shock absorber for the consequences of his endless mistakes. You do not fight systemic delusion with social media comments. Engaging in a public internet war would only validate the hysteria and give them a platform to play the victim. You fight delusion with the sharp, cold edge of the law. I opened my professional contacts directory. As an actuary dealing with corporate risk, I regularly interacted with legal professionals who specialized in containing financial disasters. I found the number for Oliver Stanton. Oliver was a senior partner at a boutique litigation firm in Manhattan. He specialized in fraud recovery, asset protection, and high-stakes corporate defense. He was not a warm man. He did not offer sympathetic platitudes or emotional support. He operated with the methodical precision of a surgeon amputating a necrotic limb. That was exactly what I needed. I called him. It was late on a Saturday afternoon, but lawyers of his caliber do not keep standard hours. He answered on the second ring. I kept my voice stripped of all emotion. I summarized the events of the last 12 hours. The $180,000 demand, the forged home equity application pending at my bank, the vendor shadow credit lines maxed out in my name, the driveway ambush with the shady notary, and finally, the social media post claiming ownership of my deed. Oliver did not interrupt. He listened to the data points the same way I listened to mortality statistics. When I finished, he asked 2 questions. Do you have the forged loan document secured? I told him yes. Do you have video evidence of the maternal admission of guilt regarding the forgery? I confirmed the recording was backed up to a secure remote server. Excellent, he said. His voice was flat and efficient. We are going to sever the limb before the infection spreads to your professional life. We need to establish a legal firewall today. Over the next 2 hours, we drafted a preemptive strike. It was not a polite request for space. It was a brutal, uncompromising cease and desist order. Oliver listed the specific federal and state statutes my parents had violated. He detailed the statutory penalties for bank fraud, identity theft, and extortion. He formally prohibited them from stepping foot on my property, contacting my employer, or using my name in any financial transaction. He drafted it with language designed to terrify anyone who understood the legal system. Then I gave Oliver a secondary directive. Send a copy directly to Courtney Pierce. Oliver paused. He noted that she might be an unwitting participant in the scheme. She had not signed the forged documents. I told him unwitting participants still cause catastrophic damage if left in the dark. Courtney needed the delusion shattered. She needed to know the marital home was a fiction. The letter addressed to her laid out the grim reality without a single drop of sugarcoating. It stated clearly that the property in the photograph belonged solely to Rosalind Griffin. It explained the fraudulent home equity inquiry. It clarified that her future husband possessed 0 equity, 0 assets, and a pending civil court judgment of $180,000. Oliver agreed with the strategy. It creates an internal fracture, he noted. If the bride realizes the groom is a liability, the wedding structure crumbles from the inside. We are removing their primary motive for stealing your house. Delivering the truth in sterile legal jargon removes all emotion from the battlefield. It strips away the family guilt and leaves only the stark, terrifying facts. Oliver arranged for the physical documents to be delivered via bonded courier on Monday morning. He also generated digital copies to be emailed immediately to every address associated with Warren, Meredith, Derek, and Courtney. I authorized the retainer fee and digitally signed the engagement letters. The rest of the weekend passed in a surreal quiet. I did not leave my house. I checked the deadbolt twice. I monitored my perimeter using the exterior cameras. My personal phone remained silent. The digital blast had hit their inboxes, and I knew the silence meant they were scrambling. They were reading the statutes. They were realizing that their golden child was standing on a trap door, and I was the one holding the lever. The illusion of their invincibility was fracturing. Monday morning arrived. The sun rose over the Connecticut coastline, casting a pale light across my kitchen. I dressed in a tailored charcoal suit. I prepared for work. An actuary does not let personal crises affect professional performance. I drove to the Stamford corporate office and logged into my terminal at exactly 8 o'clock. The markets were opening. I began reviewing a complex risk portfolio for a mid-size manufacturing firm. My mind was sharp. The legal shield was in place. I felt a fleeting sense of security. At 9:15, my desk phone rang. It was an internal extension. The caller identification displayed the name of the managing director of our regional division, Stephen Croft. Stephen rarely called consultants directly unless a client was terminating an 8-figure contract, or unless a catastrophic personal liability had breached the firm's walls. I picked up the receiver. "Good morning, Stephen." His tone was not standard corporate pleasantry. It was tense, clipped. "Rosalind, I need you to step into my office immediately. We have a severe compliance issue." I kept my voice steady. I asked if it was regarding the manufacturing portfolio I was currently auditing. He exhaled sharply into the receiver. "No, Rosalind, I just received a very disturbing phone call from your father." The air left my lungs. Warren had made good on his threat. The legal firewall had held back the real estate theft, but it had not stopped the vindictive retaliation. My father had decided that if he could not leverage my career to save his son, he would simply destroy it. The distance from my cubicle to the corner office measured exactly 42 paces. I counted them. Focusing on physical metrics keeps the mind tethered to reality when an external force attempts to induce chaos. The corporate corridor was silent. Thick carpeting absorbed the sound of my heels. Glass walls lined the perimeter, offering full transparency into the daily operations of our actuarial firm. The transparency stood in sharp contrast to the suffocating secrecy of my upbringing. Stephen Croft sat behind a wide mahogany desk. He was a man who valued predictability above all else. Sudden variables made him tense. Personal drama bleeding into his division was his worst nightmare. He gestured for me to sit. I took the leather chair opposite him. I placed my black leather portfolio on my lap and waited. He removed his wire-rimmed glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Rosalind One received a highly irregular phone call this morning. It bypassed the main switchboard and was routed directly to my direct line. The caller identified himself as your father, Warren Griffin. I kept my expression neutral. "What did he say, Stephen?" He hesitated. The words clearly tasted foul to a man accustomed to discussing amortizations and corporate yields. He stated, "You are currently suffering a severe psychological break." He claimed you have been misappropriating funds from a shared family trust and acting with extreme erraticism. He suggested you are unfit to manage our high net worth client portfolios and advised me to place you on immediate administrative leave for the safety of the firm. My father had aimed for the jugular. He bypassed a simple insult and attempted to detonate my entire professional foundation. If an actuary is perceived as mentally unstable or financially corrupt, their career is over. We deal in trust. Without trust, my license is worthless. He wanted to strip away my income so I would have no choice but to retreat to his control. Stephen leaned forward. "I value your work, Rosalind. Your quarterly audits are flawless. But these are serious allegations. I need to know if there is any truth to this or if I need to involve legal. I did not defend my sanity. I did not act outraged. Outrage looks like instability. Instead, I unzipped my leather portfolio. I extracted a crisp physical folder I had prepared before leaving my house that morning. I anticipated a secondary attack. I just did not know which vector Warren would choose. I slid the folder across the polished mahogany surface. Stephen opened it. I spoke in a measured, even tone. My father is currently attempting to extort me to cover my brother's corporate debts. When I refused to liquidate my residential property to fund a luxury wedding, they escalated. What you are looking at is the countermeasure. Stephen read the top document. It was the cease and desist order drafted by Oliver Stanton. The heavy legal jargon spelled out the extortion attempt and the boundary violations. I pointed to the second page. That is a formal identity theft affidavit filed with the Federal Trade Commission. It documents the fraudulent shadow credit lines opened using my Social Security number. I watched Stephen's eyes widen slightly as he flipped to the third item. And that, I continued, is a copy of the police report I filed at the Stanford precinct at 11 o'clock last night. It details a forged home equity line of credit application submitted to my primary mortgage lender. The individuals named in that police report are my brother Derek and my parents, Warren and Meredith Griffin. My father is not calling you out of concern for my mental health. He is calling you because he is terrified of an impending federal indictment and wants to discredit his primary witness. Stephen set the papers down. He looked at the documents and then looked at me. The tension in his shoulders vanished, replaced by a cold corporate calculation. He was looking at a high-performing employee who had just proven she possessed immaculate crisis management skills. I had neutralized a personal disaster with airtight legal documentation before it could infect his division. "Rosalind, this is exceptional," he said softly. "I am deeply sorry you are dealing with this level of betrayal." I nodded once. "I require no sympathy, Stephen. I only require the firm to ignore his harassment." "You have my full backing," he assured me. "I am forwarding this incident to our corporate security team. Warren Griffin's phone number will be permanently blocked from our switchboard. If he or anyone else from your family attempts to enter this building, they will be met by security and escorted off the premises. Your portfolios will remain under your sole direction. Do you need paid time off to handle the legal proceedings?" I declined. Work is my sanctuary. I prefer to maintain my standard billable hours. I gathered my documents, placed them back in my portfolio, and walked out of his office. The corporate shield was now locked in place. Warren's attempt to sabotage my livelihood had failed spectacularly. But as I sat back down at my terminal, a new chilling realization began to form in my mind. I stared at the blinking cursor on my dual monitors. I replayed the sequence of events. Warren Griffin was a proud man who worshipped his country club reputation. He spent decades cultivating an image of stoic wealth. Making a hysterical phone call to a corporate executive to falsely accuse his own daughter of theft was an act of supreme desperation. It was a chaotic, sloppy maneuver. Men like Warren only burn their own dignity when they have nowhere left to retreat. I had assumed my parents were trying to steal my house simply to pay for Derek's wedding and cover his civil court judgment. I thought they were just shielding their golden child from a modest failure. But the math did not add up. If Warren possessed the wealth he projected, he could have easily liquidated a stock portfolio to bail Derek out. He could have taken a loan against his own assets. Why risk federal bank fraud? Why risk trespassing and extortion? Why try to steal my equity unless my equity was the only money left on the board? I picked up my mobile phone and stepped into an empty glass-walled conference room. I dialed Oliver Stanton. The litigator answered promptly. "Ms. Griffin, has the situation evolved?" "I need you to pivot your investigation," I instructed. "Stop looking at Derek. I need a comprehensive forensic asset search on my father, Warren Griffin. Pull property records, active liens, tax filings, and retirement disclosures. I need to know his exact liquid net worth." Oliver sounded intrigued. You suspect the patriarch is insolvent? I suspect he is drowning, I replied, and he is trying to use my deed as a life raft. I gave Oliver the authorization to utilize his private investigative resources. I returned to my desk and forced myself to focus on my client portfolios. The hours ticked by. I built risk models. I calculated probability distributions. I compartmentalized the impending collision until my phone buzzed at 4:30 in the afternoon. It was an encrypted email from Oliver. The subject line read, Griffin Asset Report. I opened the attachment. The dossier was thorough. It painted a picture of a financial structure so fragile, a stiff breeze could reduce it to rubble. Warren and Meredith did not own their pristine Greenwich estate outright. They had refinanced it 3 times in the last 5 years. The current mortgage balance exceeded the appraised value. They were underwater. But the real devastation lay in the retirement accounts. Oliver had located a series of complex collateralized loan obligations. Warren had pledged his entire corporate pension as security for a string of high-interest commercial bridge loans. Those loans were funneled directly into Apex Distribution, Derek's dissolved logistics startup. My parents had not just given Derek their savings. They had bet their entire financial existence on his fraudulent tech company. When the company collapsed beneath the weight of unpaid developers and phantom revenue, it took Warren's pension down with it. I read the final page of the report. The commercial lenders were initiating seizure protocols on Warren's accounts at the end of the month. He was 30 days away from total destitution. He was facing the loss of his home, his retirement, and his social standing. The $180,000 was not just for the country club and the custom diamond. It was the exact minimum payment required to halt the commercial asset seizure. The wedding was nothing but a frantic charade designed to lock Courtney into the family before the Pierce fortune could discover the Griffins were penniless. My 2-bedroom colonial was the only unencumbered asset left in the entire family lineage. They did not just want my house to throw a party. They needed my house to survive. I closed the encrypted file. The betrayal shifted from a sharp sting into a hollow, yawning void. They were willing to sacrifice my shelter to hide their own catastrophic gambling. But as I scrolled back to the top of the dossier, my eyes caught a peculiar footnote Oliver had highlighted regarding an older financial instrument, a trust fund established long before Derek's tech company ever existed. The date on the filing was over a decade old, hinting at a deception far older and far deeper than a single wedding. I clicked the hyperlink embedded at the bottom of Oliver Stanton's asset dossier. The screen shifted from the current bankruptcy projections to an archived financial ledger. It was a scanned banking document dated October 22, 2010. The header on the document bore the logo of a regional wealth management firm. Below the logo sat a title that made my pulse falter: the Thomas Griffin Educational Trust. My grandfather Thomas had been a pragmatic man. He worked as a structural engineer for 4 decades. He wore practical shoes, drove a reliable sedan, and saved every spare dollar he earned. When I was born, he established a dedicated trust fund for my higher education. I grew up knowing that account existed. It was the promised safety net that would allow me to attend a top-tier university without carrying the crushing burden of student debt. He passed away when I was 14. 4 years later, I was accepted into an elite actuarial science program. The summer before my freshman year, Warren sat me down in his mahogany home office. He wore a grim, somber expression. He told me the global financial collapse of 2008 had decimated the market. He claimed my grandfather's trust was managed by a reckless broker who invested the capital into toxic mortgage-backed securities. According to Warren, the account balance had evaporated overnight. I believed him. Why would a daughter doubt her own father when the entire world economy was bleeding out on the evening news? I accepted my fate. I signed the lengthy promissory notes for federal and private student loans. I looked at the scanned ledger on my monitor. The document date was 2010, 2 full years after the market crash. The account balance listed right before the final withdrawal was not zero. It was $84,000. The funds had survived the recession intact. The ledger showed a single lump sum transfer authorized by Warren Griffin, acting as the primary custodian of the account. The money was wired directly into his private checking account. I closed my eyes and let my memory rewind to the autumn of 2010. I was eating instant noodles in a cramped dormitory room, taking out loans at predatory interest rates. I worked double shifts at the campus library, sorting returned books, just to afford my introductory statistics textbooks. I spent my weekends tutoring underclassmen to cover my required meal plan. That very same autumn, Derek turned 18. He did not enroll in college. He declared he was a visionary innovator who did not need a formal degree. My parents bought him a brand new BMW convertible. A graduation gift, they called it, a reward for his entrepreneurial spirit. 2 months following the car purchase, they seed-funded his very first business venture, a boutique digital marketing agency that folded 8 months later because Derek preferred hosting lavish parties over securing actual clients. A physical weight pressed against my chest. The air in the corporate conference room turned stale and thin. My hands began to tremble. The clinical actuarial detachment I relied on to survive my family finally fractured. I had spent 10 grueling years of my adult life writing monthly checks to a loan servicer. I skipped social events in my 20s. I ignored vacations. I shopped at discount grocery stores and drove a rusted sedan with a failing transmission. I structured my entire young adulthood around eliminating a debt that I never should have carried. Every spreadsheet I built, every late night I worked, every hour of sleep I sacrificed was driven by a financial burden my parents manufactured. They stole my youth to buy my brother a luxury vehicle. They cannibalized my education to indulge a boy who never valued a single dollar he was handed. I did not cry. Crying implies a sense of mourning. What I felt was not mourning. It was a cold, crystalline realization. The social contract of my family was a predatory scheme. The betrayal was no longer just about a recent extortion attempt. It was a lifetime of theft. I was not a daughter. I was a resource they mined to fund their favorite child. I owed them nothing. Not loyalty, not forgiveness, not a single breath of hesitation. The $180,000 home equity forgery was just the final insult in a decade of financial parasitism. I picked up my mobile phone and dialed Oliver Stanton. It was past 6 p.m, but the litigator answered on the first ring. I did not bother with pleasantries. Oliver, I read the footnote regarding the educational trust. I assumed you would find that illuminating. Roslyn, he replied, the statute of limitations on civil theft for that specific transfer has likely expired, but it establishes a clear historical pattern of fiduciary abuse. It establishes that they have been stealing from me since I was a teenager, I said. I need you to escalate our response. Define your parameter for escalation, he asked. Pull the trigger, Oliver. I want you to package the forged home equity line of credit application, gather the identity theft affidavit, and the documentation of the unauthorized credit card charges from the vendors. Include the audio recording of Meredith confessing to the forgery on my front porch. Submit the entire dossier to the Federal Bureau of Investigation White Collar Crime Division. Send a duplicate physical copy to the Connecticut State Prosecutor. The silence on the line stretched for a few seconds. Oliver was a ruthless attorney, but he was obligated to advise his client on the severity of the action. Rosalind, you need to understand the mechanics of what you are authorizing. Initiating federal law enforcement involvement removes your ability to steer the outcome. Once the prosecutor takes the file, it becomes an active criminal investigation. There is no quiet settlement. There is no family mediation down the line. If convicted, Warren and Meredith will face actual prison time. Derek will face felony charges. You are dropping a match into a powder keg. I looked out the glass walls of the conference room at the fading evening light. I thought about the decade of loan payments. I thought about the smirk on my mother's face when she stood on my porch and declared my house was family money. I am not looking for a settlement, Oliver. I am looking for an indictment. Submit the file. "Consider it done," he said. "The agencies will receive the preliminary evidence by tomorrow morning." I ended the call. The trap was officially primed. The wedding was scheduled for Saturday. It was currently Tuesday evening. My parents believed they could still manipulate the board. They thought my silence meant I was intimidated by Warren's threat against my career. They did not know the federal government was about to receive a highly detailed map of their crimes. The tension now was no longer about whether I would surrender my house. It was about how long their fragile facade would hold before it collapsed under the weight of an active investigation. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for Friday night at the Greenwich Country Club. The Pierces were expecting a joyous celebration of joining two prominent families. I decided in that moment that I would not be staying home on Friday. I was going to attend that dinner. I was going to look them in the eye. They were going to get a reckoning. The evening arrived with a chilling coastal breeze. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, inspecting my reflection. For a reconnaissance mission, you wear camouflage, but for an execution, you wear armor. I chose a tailored navy blazer, matching trousers, and a crisp white silk blouse. The aesthetic was deliberate. I did not want to look like a scorned relative attending a family event. I needed to look like a corporate auditor arriving to liquidate a bankrupt asset. I picked up the thick manila envelope resting on my dresser. It contained 72 pages of unredacted truth. Oliver Stanton had expedited the filing receipts from the federal authorities. Inside the folder was the government identity theft affidavit, the local police report, detailing the shadow credit accounts, the fraudulent home equity line of credit application, and the civil court judgment against my brother's dissolved logistics company. I sealed the flap. The paper felt heavy in my hands. It was the physical manifestation of my family's ruin. I walked out of my house, locked the deadbolt, and climbed into my car. The drive from Stamford to Greenwich took less than 20 minutes, but it represented a crossing into a different socioeconomic stratosphere. Greenwich is a town built on generational wealth and aggressive gatekeeping. The Pierces belonged there. My parents merely rented the illusion of belonging there. The rehearsal dinner was hosted at the Oakwood Reserve. It was an exclusive country club that required a 6-figure initiation fee just to join the wait list. My parents were not members. Edward Pierce Courtney's father was a legacy member. He had built a regional empire in commercial real estate development. Edward was a man who understood leverage, due diligence, and contracts. He was the perfect recipient for the data I was carrying. I handed my keys to the valet under the grand portico. The young man asked if I was with the Griffin party. I told him I was. He pointed toward the private dining wing. The hallway smelled of fresh lilies and polished brass. As I approached the double mahogany doors, I could hear the muffled sounds of high society, the gentle clinking of crystal stemware, the low hum of confident conversation, the soft jazz playing through hidden speakers. It sounded like success. I pushed the doors open and stepped into the room. The private dining area was softly lit by wrought iron chandeliers. Long tables draped in pristine white linen occupied the center of the space. Perhaps 40 guests were mingled around a mahogany bar, holding cocktails and exchanging pleasantries. My presence registered like a sudden drop in barometric pressure. The conversation nearest the door faltered. The silence rippled outward, spreading from table to table until the gentle jazz was the only sound left in the room. 40 pairs of eyes turned to face the entrance. I stood motionless and let my gaze sweep the room. I identified the targets. Derek stood near the grand fireplace holding a glass of champagne. He wore a velvet dinner jacket. His golden boy smile vanished the second he saw me. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and fragile. Courtney stood beside him, wearing a white silk cocktail dress. She looked confused, glancing between my face and her fiancé's suddenly terrified expression. My parents were positioned near the center of the room, holding court with Edward in the Rain Pierce. Warren wore his finest tailored suit. Meredith wore a designer evening gown she could not afford. The moment Warren noticed the silence, he turned. His eyes locked onto mine. The performed affability evaporated from his features. His jaw clenched. His posture shifted from relaxed host to cornered predator. He did not hesitate. Warren handed his drink to a passing waiter and marched toward the entrance. He moved with swift, aggressive strides intended to intimidate. He planned to intercept me before I could cross the threshold and usher me back into the hallway where he could manage the narrative. I did not retreat. I stepped forward, bypassing the entryway and moving directly into the center of the dining room. Warren intercepted me halfway. He positioned his broad shoulders to block my path. He leaned down his voice, a low, venomous hiss, designed to remain inaudible to the wealthy guests observing us. "What are you doing here, Rosalind? You were told you are no longer welcome. Turn around and leave this building right now before I have security throw you out." I looked up at him. I felt no fear. The man standing in front of me was not a formidable patriarch. He was an insolvent debtor facing federal prison time. His threats carried zero actuarial weight. "I am not here to eat, Warren," I replied. My voice was calm and modulated, but I projected it just loud enough to carry past his shoulders. "I am here to deliver a final invoice." I sidestepped him. The maneuver was fluid and deliberate. Warren reached out to grab my arm, but I anticipated the physical escalation. I shifted my weight, leaving his hand grasping empty air. I walked straight toward the center of the room, where Edward Pierce stood, watching the exchange with narrowed eyes. Edward was a shrewd man. He had silver hair and a rigid posture. He did not look angry. He looked suspicious. Commercial real estate developers spend their lives sniffing out bad investments. He was already sensing the rot beneath the floorboards. I stopped 3 feet away from him. Courtney and Derek hurried over from the fireplace. Derek looked like he was about to vomit. Meredith rushed to join Warren, forming a panicked barrier behind me. I held out the thick manila envelope toward Edward Pierce. "Before you pay for the rest of this wedding," I said. My voice echoed off the wood-paneled walls. "You should see the police reports regarding the groom's current federal fraud investigation." The words landed like physical blows. Courtney gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. Lorraine Pierce dropped her clutch purse onto the hardwood floor. Derek squeezed his eyes shut, his entire fabricated identity dissolving in real time. Edward stared at the envelope. He did not immediately reach for it. He was processing the magnitude of the statement. Meredith broke the paralysis. She let out a sharp, frantic noise and lunged forward. Her manicured hands swiped through the air, attempting to smack the envelope out of my grip. She wanted to scatter the documents across the floor to create chaos. Chaos provides cover for liars. She never made contact. Edward Pierce moved with surprising speed. He reached out and intercepted Meredith's wrist midair. The grip was firm and unyielding. The power dynamic in the room shifted instantaneously. Edward released her arm and gave her a look of pure, glacial disgust. Then he turned his attention back to me. He extended his hand and accepted the heavy, sealed folder. "What exactly is this?" he asked. His tone was strictly business. "That is a certified timeline of insolvency," I answered. "It contains the federal identity theft filings, the forged bank loan applications, and the civil court judgments your future son-in-law is currently hiding from you. He is bankrupt, Edward. The Griffins are bankrupt. They used my Social Security number to open the credit accounts funding this dinner." Edward broke the seal on the envelope. He pulled out the stack of documents. He flipped past the cover sheet, and his eyes landed on the Connecticut State Court header detailing the unpaid corporate settlement. His expression hardened into carved stone. Warren stepped forward, his face flushed, a dangerous shade of crimson. "Edward, please listen to me. This is a misunderstanding. My daughter is deeply unwell. She is trying to sabotage her brother because of a petty dispute. Those documents are fabricated." Edward did not look up from the police report. He turned the page. He examined the official Stamford precinct stamp. He read the narrative detailing the forged home equity line of credit. "These bear official federal and municipal routing numbers," Warren Edwards stated coldly. "If these are fabricated, your daughter is risking a federal indictment for falsifying government records. Something tells me she would not walk into my dining room and hand me fake police reports." Edward turned to Derek. The young groom was trembling. "Derek," Edward said softly, "is there an active warrant for your corporate assets?" Derek opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. He looked at his father. He looked at Courtney. He could not form a single syllable of defense. His silence was the loudest confession in the room. Courtney began to cry, a harsh, ragged sound that cut through the remaining tension. Lorraine moved to comfort her daughter, her eyes glaring daggers at my mother. The alliance between the two families was officially severed. The grand illusion had shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces on the country club floor. My work was done. I had delivered the data. I had mitigated my own liability by exposing the true source of the rot. I turned on my heel. I did not offer a parting insult. I did not look back at my parents or my brother. I walked toward the double mahogany doors with the exact same measured pace I used to enter. The guests parted like water, clearing a wide path for my exit. Nobody spoke a word to me. The silence was absolute. I walked out into the cool evening air. The valet retrieved my car. I handed him a modest tip, climbed into the driver's seat, and started the engine. I did not drive away immediately. I pulled into a shadowed parking space near the edge of the lot, turned off the headlights, and watched the grand windows of the Oakwood Reserve. The fallout was not instantaneous, but it was visible. Through the glowing glass panes, I saw Edward Pierce waving a stack of papers in Warren's face. I saw Meredith attempting to grab Warren's arm, only to be shoved away. I watched Courtney turn her back on Derek and walk quickly out of the dining room, followed closely by her mother. Derek collapsed into a leather wingback chair, burying his face in his hands. The facade was entirely destroyed. The Pierce family now knew the Griffins were destitute grifters operating on stolen credit. They held the legal proof in their hands. The rehearsal dinner was ruined. The social standing was obliterated. I sat in the dark car listening to the steady rhythm of my own breathing. I had protected my house. I had protected my career. I had drawn a boundary made of iron and federal law. But as I shifted the car into gear and pulled out of the country club lot, a sobering thought settled in my mind. The illusion was broken. The truth was exposed. But the wedding was still scheduled for tomorrow morning, and toxic systems, when trapped in a corner with no escape, often deploy their most desperate and dangerous measures right before the end. Tomorrow was still coming. The drive back along the Merritt Parkway offered a quiet sanctuary. The winding road, wrapped in dense Connecticut foliage, felt worlds away from the manicured lawns of Greenwich. I navigated the dark curves with a steady hand. My dashboard clock glowed a pale blue, 10:45 in the evening. I calculated the exact timeline of the fallout currently unfolding miles behind me. Edward Pierce was a commercial developer, a man whose entire empire relied on immaculate contracts and verified escrows. Right now, he was likely sitting in a secluded wing of the country club, dissecting the 72 pages I had handed him. He was reading Oliver Stanton's cease and desist order. He was reviewing the Federal Trade Commission identity theft report. He was tracing the fraudulent signatures on the home equity line of credit application. My father had spent 2 years building a pristine facade to impress the Pierce family. I had dismantled it in 60 seconds using federal forms. I arrived at my Stamford Colonial. I parked in the driveway, unlocked the deadbolt, and stepped into the silent foyer. I did not turn on the main overhead lights. I walked into the kitchen, illuminated only by the street lamp filtering through the blinds. I poured a glass of cold water and sat at the granite island. The adrenaline from the rehearsal dinner had faded, leaving a sharp, focused awareness. I knew the night was far from over. When a structural foundation collapses, the dust takes hours to settle. At exactly 1 o'clock in the morning, my phone vibrated against the marble counter. The caller identification displayed Courtney Pierce's name. I let the device hum for a moment. Answering a call from an emotional bride in the middle of the night violates every rule of crisis management. But Courtney was not the enemy. She was a casualty of my parents' financial warfare. She deserved the cold, unvarnished truth. I accepted the call. I did not offer a greeting. Rosalind. The voice on the other end was fractured. Courtney was weeping. Not the performative tears my mother utilized for sympathy, but the ragged, hollow sobbing of a woman whose entire reality had just shattered. Tell me it is a lie. Please tell me you are just angry about the house and you made those papers up. I kept my tone gentle but firm. I do not fabricate evidence, Courtney. I am an actuary. My entire profession is based on identifying liabilities and calculating truth. The documents your father is holding are certified federal records. She choked on a sob. Derek told my dad you are going through a mental health crisis. He said you became obsessed with keeping the Stamford house and printed those forms off the internet to ruin the wedding. He swore on his life the business is fine. Listen to me, I replied. Derek dissolved Apex Distribution months ago. He has a civil court judgment filed against him for unpaid developers. He used my Social Security number to open the Platinum credit card currently holding your floral deposit. He is facing an active law enforcement investigation for identity theft. He does not possess wealth. He possesses a criminal record waiting to happen. The silence on the line stretched. I could hear her uneven breathing. The cognitive dissonance was fighting a losing battle against the verified data. But the house, Courtney whispered. He showed us the listing. He said you were moving to Manhattan for a promotion and gifting us the deed to start our marriage. He showed my mother the real estate transfer forms. Those forms were forged by my mother, I stated flatly. They attempted to execute a hostile home equity loan against my property to pay off Derek's corporate lawsuits. I caught the inquiry before it cleared. That is why they are scrambling. They promised you a kingdom they do not own. A new sound emerged from the receiver. It was a sharp intake of breath, followed by a quiet, devastating realization. Courtney was connecting the variables. Rosalind, she stammered, the joint accounts. Derek promised my father the Griffin family was matching our marital contribution. He said Warren was wiring $500,000 into our shared portfolio on Monday morning to match what my parents gifted us for the wedding. I closed my eyes. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together, forming a horrifying picture. A phantom $500,000. This was the hidden variable. This explained the sheer, unhinged desperation of my parents' actions. Warren had collateralized his pension to keep Derek's business afloat. They were broke, but they had made a staggering financial promise to Edward Pierce to secure the marriage. They needed $500,000 by Monday to maintain the illusion of generational wealth. That was why they forged the home equity loan for $180,000. That was why they drained their own retirement. They were trying to scrape together enough stolen capital to fund the joint account before Edward Pierce checked the balance. They were attempting a $500,000 shell game. There is no $500,000, Courtney, I said. My voice carried the weight of a judge reading a verdict. My father is leveraged to the brink of bankruptcy. If you marry Derek tomorrow, you will not be joining a wealthy dynasty. You will be legally attaching yourself to a mountain of fraudulent debt. A sudden scuffle erupted over the audio feed. I heard a male voice shouting in the background. It was not Derek. The deep, commanding tone belonged to my father. The sound of a phone being snatched away echoed through the speaker. "You vindictive little traitor," Warren's voice boomed through the receiver. The polished patriarch was gone. He sounded feral. He was panting, his breath hot and jagged against the microphone. "Hello, Warren," I responded. My pulse remained steady. "You think you won?" he snarled. "You think handing Edward a folder full of garbage is going to stop this?" I spent hours talking him down. I explained your psychological issues. Edward is a businessman. He knows relatives get jealous and create drama. Edward is a commercial developer, I corrected him. He knows how to verify a court docket number. He knows how to read a federal identity theft affidavit. You cannot talk your way out of a government filing. "Watch me," Warren hissed. "The wedding is happening tomorrow. The caterers are paid. The venue is secure. Courtney is just spooked, but Derek is handling her right now. We are walking down that aisle, and when it is over, I am coming for you." I am hiring the best litigation firm in Connecticut. I will sue you for defamation. I will sue you for tortious interference. I will drag your name through the mud until your firm fires you and you are begging me for a loan. The threat of defamation is the favorite weapon of a cornered narcissist. They rely on legal intimidation to silence their victims. But defamation requires the publication of a false statement. Truth is an absolute defense. You cannot sue someone for handing over a verified police report, I reminded him. You have no legal standing. You have no pension. You have no leverage. I have enough capital to ruin you, he shouted. You are going to pay for this, Rosalind. You are going to lose everything. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the cold granite island. I pictured my father, standing in a hallway at the country club, sweating through his bespoke suit, grasping a stolen phone. He was clinging to the illusion of control because acknowledging the reality meant accepting his own destruction. The wedding was merely a few hours away. He truly believed he could wake up, put on a tuxedo, and march his fraudulent son down the aisle. He believed his bank accounts would function. He believed the shadow credit lines would hold. He did not realize the institutional gears I had set into motion were already locking into place. I had not just called the vendors. I had engaged the fraud departments of major financial institutions. I had submitted dossiers to federal investigators. The wheels of the banking sector turned slowly during the weekend, but the automated fraud triggers wait for no man. I did not raise my voice. I delivered my final statement with the precision of a surgeon making a final cut. Check your accounts in the morning, Dad. I pressed the red button on the screen and disconnected the call. I turned the device off entirely. The silence of my kitchen returned, wrapping around me like a protective shroud. The pieces were no longer in my hands. The board was set. The sun would rise in 5 hours. When it did, the Griffin family would discover that the law does not care about your social standing, your tailored suits, or your desperate lies. The audience was seated, and the ultimate systemic collapse was scheduled for dawn. The morning of the wedding arrived with clear skies and a sharp coastal chill. I woke at my usual time of 6 o'clock. I did not feel the crushing anxiety my parents likely expected me to endure. I felt the precise, measured calm of a mathematician watching a verified equation solve itself. I walked into my kitchen and prepared a pot of dark roast coffee. The scent of roasted beans filled the quiet space. I sat at the granite island and powered on my laptop. Financial institutions operate on automated algorithms. They do not care about social standing or country club memberships. They monitor data patterns. When Oliver Stanton submitted the identity theft affidavit and the forged home equity application to the federal authorities the prior evening, he also carbon copied the fraud divisions of the major holding banks. My father had intertwined his legitimate retirement accounts with the shadow credit lines Derek opened. He commingled funds to keep his son's dissolved logistics company afloat. In the banking sector, commingling fraudulent debt with personal assets triggers an immediate systemic quarantine. The algorithms flag the network. The human analysts review the red flags. Then the institution drops a steel door over the accounts to limit their own liability. I opened my encrypted email portal. A message from Oliver sat at the top of my inbox, timestamped at 7:15. The subject line read simply, "Status update." The body of the email contained a single paragraph. The federal banking networks have engaged their security protocols. The accounts linked to Warren and Meredith Griffin are now locked under suspicion of wire fraud and unauthorized identity exploitation. The freeze is total. I closed the laptop and took a sip of my coffee. The digital clock on the stove shifted to 8 o'clock. At that exact moment, my cell phone began to vibrate. I had unblocked my extended family members out of sheer analytical curiosity. I wanted to monitor the collapse. The caller identification displayed Aunt Gail's name. She did not text. She called. When I did not answer, she left a voicemail. Then she called again. By 8:15, I had 4 new audio messages. I pressed play on the first recording. I put the phone on speaker and let the audio fill the empty kitchen. Aunt Gail sounded breathless. The polished socialite facade had vanished. Rosalind picked up the phone. "We are in the bridal suite at the venue, and there is an emergency. The hair and makeup artists are demanding their final payment before they start on Courtney and the bridesmaids." Meredith handed them her platinum card, and it was declined. She tried her debit card, and the machine rejected it. The artists are packing up their kits. Courtney is hyperventilating. Meredith is crying in the bathroom. "We need you to call the salon direct line and authorize a charge over the phone. Just do this one thing, Rosalind. Pick up." I let the recording end. The digital beep sounded loud in the quiet room. Meredith was standing in a luxury bridal suite surrounded by silk robes and champagne flutes, staring at a plastic terminal that refused to accept her money. The humiliation must have been suffocating. She had spent a lifetime projecting an image of effortless affluence. She believed her status insulated her from consequences. Now she was being treated like a vagrant by wedding vendors. The bank had severed her access to her own funds. I tapped the screen to play the second voicemail. Gail's voice was louder this time. The panic had escalated into sheer terror. "Rosalind, where are you? Warren is at the bank branch downtown. He tried to wire the final catering release to the country club. The venue manager says if the funds do not clear by 9 o'clock, they are pulling the tables and sending the waitstaff home." Warren called Meredith screaming. The bank teller told him his accounts are locked for suspicious federal activity. The branch manager will not even speak to him. They gave him a printed notice and asked him to leave the premises. "What did you do, Rosalind?" "The wedding is going to be canceled. Call me back immediately." The phrase suspicious federal activity echoed through my kitchen. It was the exact terminology utilized by financial institutions when complying with a government mandate. Warren Griffin had walked into a marble lobby expecting to flex his authority. He expected to yell at a teller and force a wire transfer through sheer intimidation. He relied on his tailored suit and his deep voice to bend the rules. Instead, he was handed a printed notice of his own insolvency and escorted out the door by branch security. The system he relied on to enable his golden son had recognized him as a threat. The bank was protecting its own ledger. The third voicemail started with a muffled sob. Gail was crying. The woman who just yesterday texted me to call me a bitter spinster was now weeping into my receiver. Her hypocrisy was staggering. She had willingly participated in the smear campaign against my character, and now she expected me to rescue them from the fallout. "Please, Rosalind, I am begging you. Edward Pierce is downstairs in the lobby demanding to see Warren." Edward looks furious. Courtney refuses to put on her dress. Derek is pacing in the hallway looking sick. "We just need $10,000. Just $10,000 to pay the hairstylists and release the catering deposit so we can at least get through the ceremony. We can figure out the rest later. I will pay you back myself. Just wire the funds. Do not let your family be humiliated like this." I looked at the digital playback bar on the screen. The fourth voicemail was 3 minutes long. I did not press play. I pressed the delete icon. I deleted the first message. I deleted the second. I erased them all. I did not listen to the final plea. $10,000 would not save them. $10,000 was a temporary bandage on a severed artery. If I wired the funds, I would be participating in the shell game. I would be validating their delusion. They wanted me to buy them a few more hours of pretending they were a dynasty instead of a group of grifters waiting for the authorities to arrive. They expected me to subsidize the very same wedding they planned to finance by stealing my home. I walked over to the kitchen sink and washed my ceramic mug. The interpersonal drama was over. The shouting matches and the threatening text messages were obsolete tactics. My parents could no longer fight me because I was no longer their opponent. They had crossed a threshold where the antagonist was no longer an uncooperative daughter. The antagonist was the United States banking system and the federal legal code. You cannot manipulate a fraud detection algorithm. You cannot gaslight a state prosecutor. You cannot guilt trip a branch manager who is bound by federal compliance laws. The institutional gears were grinding forward with cold, mechanical efficiency. The law was acting on my behalf. I had removed my own emotional labor from the equation and outsourced the consequences to the authorities. My parents were learning that actions carry a quantifiable cost, and the bill had finally come due. My phone vibrated again, another incoming call from Gail. I slid my thumb across the screen and powered the device down entirely. The black screen reflected the morning light. The wedding ceremony was scheduled to begin at noon. The guest list included 150 prominent figures from the local real estate and corporate sectors. The Pierces had hired a string quartet to play as the guests arrived. I imagined the scene currently unfolding at the country club. The pristine white chairs arranged on the manicured lawn, the floral archway wilting in the sun, the silent, terrified groom, the enraged father of the bride holding a folder full of police reports. My parents had demanded I sell my shelter to finance their illusion. They threatened to erase me from their lives if I refused to comply. They thought the worst consequence they could inflict was my absence from their social circle. They failed to realize that my absence was not a punishment. My absence was the exact variable that caused their entire universe to collapse. Without my equity to stabilize their debt, the gravity of their own choices finally caught up to them. I walked into my living room and opened the front blinds. The Connecticut neighborhood was peaceful. A neighbor walked a golden retriever down the sidewalk. A delivery truck rolled slowly past my driveway. The world outside my walls continued its steady, predictable rhythm. I felt a profound sense of peace. The storm was raging miles away, tearing through bridal suites and bank lobbies, but my house was quiet. I sat on my sofa and waited for the clock to strike noon. The spectacle was out of my hands now. I remained in my living room until the clock struck 1 in the afternoon. The ceremony was scheduled for noon. If my calculations were correct, the timeline of a forced luxury event operating without liquid capital would begin to fracture at approximately hour 1. I decided to observe the final collapse. I did not drive to the Glenmore Country Club to gloat. An actuary does not celebrate a system failure. We attend the debriefing to verify the risk was permanently neutralized. The drive took 20 minutes. When I pulled up to the grand entrance, the usual pristine organization of a high-end venue was missing. The valet stand was unattended. Several luxury vehicles were parked haphazardly near the portico. The illusion was already shedding its outer layers. I bypassed the main lobby and navigated through the side corridors, utilizing my knowledge of corporate event spaces. I slipped into the main ballroom through the service entrance and positioned myself in the shadows near the catering preparation doors. The visual before me was a masterclass in atmospheric dread. The room was designed to hold 150 guests. They were seated at circular tables draped in white silk, but the tables were barren. The imported orchids my brother tried to purchase with my stolen identity were absent. The centerpieces consisted of cheap votive candles, hastily arranged by a panicked coordinator. The waitstaff stood along the perimeter with their arms crossed. No food was being served. No champagne was being poured. The string quartet in the corner played a disjointed melody that sounded more like a dirge than a celebration. The ceremony had clearly been delayed or rushed through in a state of sheer panic. The guests wore expressions of profound confusion. Greenwich socialites communicate their displeasure through sharp whispers and rigid posture. The room buzzed with a low-frequency hum of judgment. I focused my attention on the head table. The dynamic was chilling. Courtney sat in her designer gown, looking hollowed out. Her makeup was pristine, but her eyes were vacant. She stared straight ahead, unblinking. Lorraine sat next to her, radiating a silent, glacial fury. Edward Pierce sat with his hands folded on the empty tablecloth. He was a man who built commercial real estate empires by enforcing ironclad contracts. He despised public humiliation, and he was currently marinating in it. On the opposite side sat my family. Derek looked physically ill. His complexion was the color of damp ash. He tugged at the collar of his tuxedo as if it were restricting his airway. Meredith stared at her lap. Her hands gripped her silk clutch so tightly her knuckles were white. Then there was Warren. He was sweating. A thin sheen of perspiration coated his forehead, catching the light from the chandeliers. Yet he was still attempting to pilot a crashing plane. He believed he could salvage his reputation with a charismatic performance. He stood up from his chair. He picked up a crystal flute and tapped it with a silver spoon. The sharp ringing sound cut through the murmurs. The room fell into a hesitant silence. Morin smiled. It was a ghastly stretching of his facial muscles. "Thank you all for joining us today," he began. His voice echoed through the cavernous space. It lacked its usual booming authority. It sounded thin, brittle. "We apologize for the slight delay in the service. We experienced a minor logistical hiccup with the venue, but the kitchen is preparing a wonderful meal for us. Today is about family. It is about overcoming obstacles and joining two wonderful lineages together." The guests stared at him. Nobody smiled back. The wealthy possess a predatory instinct for detecting financial distress. They smelled the insolvency. Morin raised his glass higher. "So please, raise your glasses to Derek and Courtney, a beautiful couple destined for a lifetime of success." Before a single guest could lift a drink, the main double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. The heavy wood hit the stops with a resounding thud. The venue manager walked in. He was a tall man in a dark suit who usually maintained an invisible presence at these events. Today, he was the focal point. He marched straight down the center aisle. He was not alone. Flanking him were two uniformed officers from the local police department. Their radios crackled, slicing through the heavy silence of the formal gathering. The string quartet stopped playing mid-measure. The sudden absence of music sucked the remaining oxygen from the room. I stood in the shadows and watched the variables collide. The venue manager stopped 10 feet from the head table. The officers stood right behind him. Their hands rested near their duty belts. Morin lowered his glass. The artificial smile melted off his face, replaced by a mask of sheer terror. "Mr. Griffin," the manager said. He did not use a microphone, but the acoustics of the room amplified his voice. "We have a critical issue. The secondary credit card you provided an hour ago has been flagged by the merchant processor for suspected wire fraud. The primary card on file is locked under a federal identity theft hold." Morin stammered. He looked around at the guests. "Keep your voice down. We can handle this in the office. This is a private event." "It ceased being a private event when you attempted to defraud my business," the manager replied coldly. "Your accounts are frozen. You have breached the contract. I am terminating this reception effective immediately." The manager turned toward the perimeter of the room and gave a sharp nod to the waitstaff. The catering team did not hesitate. They turned around and filed out through the service doors, abandoning the empty tables. The logistics of the luxury wedding evaporated in real time. The illusion was stripped down to the bare floorboards. Meredith let out a high-pitched gasp. She buried her face in her hands. The pristine image she had spent decades cultivating was dying in front of her peers. Edward Pierce did not gasp. He stood up. The commercial developer moved with deliberate, terrifying precision. He walked over to Warren. He did not shout. He reached out and snatched the microphone directly off the table stand in front of my father. Edward turned to face the room of 150 elite guests. His voice resonated with undeniable authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," Edward announced, "I apologize for wasting your weekend. The ceremony you witnessed earlier today will be legally annulled by Monday morning. This reception is officially canceled. The family hosting you are not who they claim to be. They are insolvent and currently under investigation for stealing their own daughter's identity to fund this charade. I ask that you gather your belongings and exit the premises." A collective shockwave rolled through the seated crowd. Chairs scraped against the hardwood floor. The murmurs erupted into a cacophony of scandalized whispers. The Greenwich elite do not linger in the presence of legal ruin. They packed their evening bags and moved swiftly toward the exits, avoiding eye contact with the head table. Courtney stood up. She did not look at Derek. She lifted the heavy skirt of her designer gown, stepped down from the elevated platform, and began walking rapidly toward the side exit. Her mother followed close behind. Derek finally snapped out of his paralysis. The reality of losing his wealthy bride and his fabricated future shattered his remaining composure. "Courtney, wait!" he yelled her name, his voice cracking. He scrambled around the table, knocking over a crystal water pitcher. It shattered on the floor, sending shards of glass across the wood. He lunged forward to chase her down the aisle. He made it exactly 3 steps. The 2 police officers shifted their positioning, blocking his path. The taller officer held up a hand, indicating Derek needed to halt. "Derek Griffin," the officer stated. His tone was professional and unyielding. "We need you to step outside with us, right now." Derek backed up, holding his hands in a placating gesture. "I did not do anything. I am the groom. I need to talk to my wife." "You are a suspect in an active identity theft and credit fraud complaint filed in Stamford," the officer clarified. "We received the federal alert this morning. You are going to walk out to the cruiser with us to answer some questions, or you are going to leave this room in handcuffs. The choice is yours." Derek's shoulders slumped. The defiance drained out of him, leaving only a hollow, frightened boy. He looked back at his parents for salvation. The safety net he had relied on his entire life was nowhere to be found. He turned around and walked slowly down the center aisle, escorted by the officers. The remaining guests watched him leave in stunned silence. The room emptied rapidly. Within 5 minutes, the grand ballroom was reduced to an echoing cavern. Warren and Meredith were left standing on the elevated platform. They were entirely isolated. Their golden child was detained in the back of a police cruiser. Their wealthy in-laws had publicly disowned them. The guests they sought to impress had fled in disgust. Their credit was locked. Their pension was seized. The facade they sacrificed my future to build had burned to ash. I stood in the shadows by the kitchen doors and watched them. They looked small. They looked frail. The patriarchal authority and the maternal entitlement were gone. They were just 2 bankrupt individuals standing in the wreckage of their own deceit. I felt no triumph. I did not feel a sudden surge of joy or vindication. Vengeance is an emotional reaction, and actuaries do not trade in emotion. What I felt was a profound, chilling clarity. The ledger was finally balanced. The liability was permanently neutralized. I turned my back on the empty ballroom and walked out through the service doors, leaving them to the silence they had earned. The summons from the state prosecutor's office arrived via a formal phone call early Monday morning. The tone of the scheduling clerk was strictly procedural. They requested my presence at the downtown municipal precinct to provide a sworn statement regarding the identity theft complaint. I did not bring legal counsel. Oliver Stanton reviewed the request and advised that as the primary victim offering documented evidence, my role was strictly evidentiary. I dressed in a tailored charcoal gray suit. The attire projected authority and control. I drove to the municipal building, navigating the brutalist concrete architecture that housed the local justice system. The contrast between the gilded ballrooms of Greenwich and the sterile corridors of law enforcement was striking. The precinct smelled of industrial bleach and burnt coffee. Fluorescent tubes buzzed overhead, casting a harsh blue light that illuminated every scuff mark on the linoleum floor. I checked in at the front desk and was escorted down a long hallway into a windowless interview room. The space contained a heavy steel table and 3 metal chairs. It was designed to extract confessions by inducing psychological discomfort. I took a seat and placed my leather briefcase on the table. 2 individuals entered the room a moment later. Detective Miller was a seasoned investigator with tired eyes and a rumpled shirt. Assistant District Attorney Reynolds was a sharp young lawyer carrying a legal pad. They introduced themselves, sitting across from me with expressions of sympathetic patience. They expected to console a distressed relative caught in a messy domestic dispute. Victims of familial fraud often arrive weeping, torn between seeking justice and protecting their bloodline. They struggle to articulate the timeline and frequently retract their statements. I did not weep. I unzipped my briefcase and withdrew a stack of bound reports. I am an actuary. My profession dictates that chaos must be translated into quantifiable data. I slid the first binder across the steel table. I explained that it contained a comprehensive chronological ledger of every fraudulent transaction executed by Derek Griffin utilizing my compromised Social Security number. I had formatted the data into discrete columns: the date of the inquiry, the merchant identifying code the financial instrument leveraged, and the resulting shadow credit balance. Detective Miller opened the binder. He scanned the immaculate spreadsheets. His posture shifted immediately from casual observation to intense professional focus. I slid the second binder forward. I stated that this file contained the forged home equity application targeting my residential property in Stamford. I pointed out the specific biometric anomalies in the signature my mother had attempted to replicate. I provided a secure digital storage drive containing the video recording of Meredith admitting to the forgery on my front porch. Reynolds picked up the drive, her eyes narrowing as she grasped the sheer volume of actionable evidence handed to her on a silver platter. I did not stop there. I presented the third folder. This document detailed the unauthorized liquidation of the Thomas Griffin Educational Trust in 2010. I explained how Warren Griffin utilized his custodial access to drain $84,000 from my college fund to purchase a luxury vehicle for his son. I watched the detective look up from the spreadsheets. He stared at me for a long, quiet moment. Law enforcement officers spend their entire careers chasing shadows and untangling messy, contradictory testimonies. They are rarely handed a fully audited, cross-referenced map of a criminal enterprise. Miller closed the primary folder and told me my thoroughness was unlike anything he had encountered in his 20-year career. I informed him that risk assessment requires precision, and I wanted to ensure the state possessed zero ambiguity regarding the intent of the perpetrators. The formal statement process took 2 hours. I narrated the timeline while a stenographer recorded every syllable. When we finished, Detective Miller thanked me and escorted me back toward the main lobby. He mentioned that Derek was currently being processed in a holding cell downstairs. His initial bravado had crumbled during his interrogation, resulting in a frantic, disjointed confession that only solidified the federal charges. I nodded, absorbing the information without offering a sympathetic reaction. The detective opened the secure double doors leading out to the public waiting area. I stepped through the threshold and immediately recognized 2 figures sitting on a battered wooden bench: Warren and Meredith. They had been waiting for me. The transformation in their physical appearance was shocking. The country club polish had entirely evaporated. Warren wore a wrinkled shirt without a tie. He looked hollowed out. The deep lines on his face were pronounced, mapping the sudden realization of his own ruin. Meredith looked even worse. Her hair was unkempt. The expensive cosmetics she relied on to project status were smeared around her swollen eyes. The moment the heavy security doors clicked shut behind me, they stood up. They did not launch into an aggressive attack. The patriarchal rage that fueled Warren's earlier threats in my driveway was gone. The bank freeze and the police intervention had stripped him of his weaponry. He approached me with a slow, hesitant shuffle. He held his hands out, palms facing upward, in a gesture of surrender. "Rosalind, please," he murmured. His voice was hoarse, a pathetic rasp that lacked any trace of his former authority. "We need to talk to you. The prosecutor is talking about federal mail fraud. They are talking about mandatory sentencing guidelines for the bank applications. You have to drop the charges. Tell them it was a misunderstanding." Meredith stepped forward, tears spilling down her cheeks. These were not the calculated tears she used to manipulate social situations. This was genuine, unfiltered panic. She was a woman staring over the edge of a cliff. "How can you do this?" she cried, reaching out to grasp my sleeve. "He is your brother. We are your parents. We made mistakes, but we were just trying to survive the bankruptcy. You cannot send your own flesh and blood to a prison cell." I pulled my arm back, breaking her grip with a swift, deliberate motion. I looked at the 2 strangers standing before me. I felt no residual anger. I felt a cool, absolute detachment. I spoke clearly, ensuring my voice carried across the quiet, echoing lobby. I didn't do anything to this family. You built a house out of lies, and I just refused to be the foundation anymore." I turned my back on them and walked straight toward the sliding glass doors. I did not look over my shoulder. I walked out into the bright morning sunlight. The crisp Connecticut air filled my lungs. I left them standing inside the precinct, facing the terrifying reality of their own choices. The explosive conflict was over, yielding to the slow, quiet process of untangling the vast legal mess they had created. 90 days is exactly one fiscal quarter. In the corporate sector, a single quarter is a standard metric utilized to measure the trajectory of a failing enterprise. In the judicial sector, 90 days is sufficient time to watch a fraudulent dynasty dismantle itself down to the very foundation. 3 months had passed since I walked out of the municipal precinct and left my parents sitting on that battered wooden bench. The explosive, rapid-fire collisions of the wedding weekend had transitioned into the slow, grinding machinery of the American legal system. The adrenaline faded, replaced by the sterile reality of court dockets, asset liquidations, and permanent consequences. Derek was the first domino to officially fall. His logistics startup, Apex Distribution, was formally dissolved by a bankruptcy judge in early November. The civil court judgments he had attempted to outrun finally caught him, seizing the meager remnants of his phantom corporate accounts. But the commercial ruin was secondary to the criminal indictments. The state prosecutor upgraded the charges regarding the shadow credit lines. Derek was no longer a golden boy entrepreneur pitching venture capitalists in luxury lounges. He was a criminal defendant out on a restrictive bond, facing 3 separate felony counts of identity theft and wire fraud. He was mandated to wear an electronic monitoring device around his ankle, confining his movements to a strict geographic radius while he awaited trial. The bespoke tailored dinner jackets were replaced by the grim, exhausting reality of plea deal negotiations. A federal judge did not care that he was his mother's favorite son. The law only cared about the paper trail. Courtney Pierce did not linger to watch the tragedy unfold. The Greenwich socialite executed a legal erasure with breathtaking speed. Within 72 hours of the ballroom collapse, her attorneys filed for an expedited annulment. She did not seek a standard divorce. She sought a judicial declaration that the marriage was orchestrated under false pretenses and therefore never legally existed. The Pierce family treated the brief union like a toxic asset and liquidated it instantaneously. But Edward Pierce was not a man who simply walked away from a bad investment. He demanded restitution. He unleashed his own elite commercial litigation team against my father. Edward filed a comprehensive civil lawsuit against Warren Griffin for fraud by inducement, seeking full reimbursement for every dollar spent on the ruined country club reception, the floral deposits, and the caterers. Edward possessed endless capital to fund the lawsuit. My father possessed nothing to defend himself. The financial quarantine initiated by the federal banks operated exactly as designed. Warren and Meredith had collateralized their pension to float Derek's business, assuming they could steal my equity to cover the margins. When I blocked the home equity line of credit, their entire shell game imploded. They defaulted on their bridge loans almost immediately. The commercial lenders executed their default clauses, seizing the remaining retirement accounts to satisfy the debt. The most devastating blow to their carefully cultivated image was the loss of their primary residence. They did not own the sprawling Greenwich estate they had occupied for the past 5 years. They merely rented it, utilizing inflated income statements to maintain the illusion of generational wealth. When their banking profiles froze, the rent checks bounced. The resulting eviction was quiet, but ruthless. Warren and Meredith were forced to vacate the luxury property by the end of October. Their credit profiles were radioactive, decimated by the fraud lockdown and the pending civil litigation from the Pierce family. No reputable landlord in Fairfield County would accept their rental applications. They were forced to downsize to a cramped, poorly insulated 2-bedroom apartment in a heavily industrialized section of Bridgeport. The sweeping, manicured lawns and the neighborhood country club memberships were replaced by asphalt parking lots and chain-link fences. They had spent their entire adult lives projecting an aura of effortless superiority, viewing people who lived in modest apartments as failures. Now they were permanently trapped in the exact demographic they had always mocked. The social downgrade was a prison sentence all on its own. The extended family observed this catastrophic descent in total silence. 3 months ago, my phone had vibrated constantly with self-righteous attacks. Aunt Gail had labeled me a bitter spinster. Uncle Vince had threatened to excommunicate me for refusing to surrender my deed. They had weaponized the family group chat, eager to perform their loyalty to Warren and Meredith by tearing me down. Now that same group chat was a digital graveyard. Not a single text message arrived for Thanksgiving. The holiday passed without a single phone call or passive-aggressive email. Their silence was profoundly revealing. Gail and Vince did not reach out to apologize for participating in the smear campaign. They did not acknowledge the federal indictments or the staggering scope of the deception I had uncovered. Acknowledging the truth would require them to admit their own hypocrisy. It would require them to confront the uncomfortable fact that they had aligned themselves with criminals to bully a victim. So they simply looked away. They cut their losses and pretended the Griffin family crisis did not exist. They abandoned Warren and Meredith the exact moment the social capital evaporated. Toxic networks dissolve the instant the illusion of prestige is broken. I experienced the fallout from a distance, secure within the walls of my Stanford Colonial. But holding a boundary is not a triumphant cinematic experience. It is a solitary, quiet endeavor. There were no victory parades in my honor. There was only an echoing stillness. Sitting in my kitchen on a Sunday morning, watching the frost gather on the window panes, I felt the heavy, undeniable weight of isolation. I had successfully defended my home, my career, and my financial future. I had won my freedom. Yet the victory required me to mourn a profound loss. I was not mourning Warren Meredith or Derek. I was grieving the phantom family I had always wished for, but never possessed. I grieved the illusion that I had parents who viewed me as a daughter rather than a financial resource. The hardest part of surviving a predatory family dynamic is accepting that the love they offered was always transactional. When I refused to pay the invoice, the affection was instantly repossessed. You survive the extraction, but you are left holding the empty space where a family was supposed to be. It is a bitter harvest. You reap your independence, but the soil is salted. The quiet of the house was a constant reminder that my safety came at the cost of my origin. I channeled that quiet grief into structural fortification. I met with Oliver Stanton one final time at his Manhattan office to finalize the defensive perimeter. An actuary does not just patch a leak. We design a system that prevents all future breaches. We did not just maintain the initial credit freezes, we established permanent legal locks. Oliver drafted the complex paperwork to transfer the title of my Stanford house into a blind, irrevocable trust. I remained the sole beneficiary, but the legal framework shielded the asset from any future familial claims, frivolous lawsuits, or external inquiries. The deed was no longer in my name. It belonged to an entity they could never touch. My Social Security number remained under a lifelong federal security alert. Any attempt to open a line of credit required a rigorous biometric verification process that nobody could forge. I built an impenetrable fortress out of notarized paper and statutory law. Oliver handed me the final bound portfolio containing the finalized trust documents. He offered a rare, subtle nod of professional respect. "You executed a flawless defense, Rosalind," he noted, snapping his leather briefcase shut. "The threat matrix is permanently neutralized. They have no avenues left to exploit." I accepted the portfolio. The weight of the documents felt incredibly grounding. I thanked him for his meticulous precision. Walking out of his office and stepping onto the bustling New York pavement, I realized the ultimate truth of the entire ordeal. The legal systems, the banks, the police precincts, and the fraud algorithms were cold, impersonal entities. They lacked empathy. They did not care about my childhood or my emotional scars. But they performed their function flawlessly. They analyzed the raw data, identified the fraudulent variables, and protected the rightful owner. The system did exactly what it was designed to do. It protected the truth. And for the first time in my 34 years, the truth was strong enough to keep me safe. The morning sun breached the horizon, casting long, pale shadows across the hardwood floors of my Stamford Colonial. I sat at the granite kitchen island with a ceramic mug of dark roast coffee. The house was quiet. It was a dense, structural quiet that settles into a physical space when a persistent, systemic threat is finally eradicated. A full year had passed since the Saturday morning my phone lit up with a coordinated demand for $180,000. The seasons had cycled through their predictable algorithms. The oak tree in the front yard shed its leaves to survive the winter and grew them back when the soil warmed. The physical architecture of this property remained unchanged, but its fundamental meaning had shifted entirely. It was no longer just a piece of real estate or a repository for market equity. It was a monument to a battle fought and won on the cold terms of federal law. I looked around the living room, noting the bright sunlight catching the edges of the picture frames and the tall bookshelves. My parents had viewed these walls as an exploitable resource. They looked at my shelter and saw a liquidation opportunity to bail out a son who refused to carry his own weight. Today, the walls belong to an irrevocable blind trust, and the quiet belonged solely to me. An actuary evaluates the true cost of an asset by calculating both the visible maintenance fees and the hidden underlying liabilities. For 34 years, I failed to apply that basic professional principle to my own bloodline. I sat in my kitchen and conducted the final audit of my parents' affection. The resulting mathematics were devastating in their stark simplicity. Their love was never a baseline guarantee given freely to a daughter. It was a predatory lease agreement. It required extortionate monthly payments in the form of unblinking obedience, forced silence, and severe financial sacrifice. The cost of remaining in their good graces was the slow, steady erosion of my own stability. In a functional, healthy family system, resources flowed downward to protect the vulnerable members. In a toxic family system, resources are forcefully extracted from the competent child to shield the reckless child from the natural consequences of his actions. Derek was permitted to fail continuously because I was expected to act as his eternal shock absorber. When his logistics startup crumbled under the weight of unpaid developers and unpaid taxes, they did not ask him to get a job. They did not suggest he file for conventional bankruptcy. They asked me to sell my home. They were willing to render me homeless to maintain his public illusion of corporate success for a Greenwich socialite. Recognizing that specific dynamic is a bitter pill to swallow. It requires you to look in the mirror and accept that the people who brought you into the world view you as a disposable utility. But that cold acceptance is the only verified path to true autonomy. I stopped paying the premium on an insurance policy that offered me zero coverage. The discipline required to sever those toxic ties translated directly into my professional trajectory. 2 months ago, Stephen Croft called me back into his mahogany corner office. It was the exact same room where my father had attempted to orchestrate my termination via a hysterical, fabricated phone call. This time, the managing director was not dealing with a compliance emergency. He slid a revised employment contract across his wide, polished desk. The actuarial firm was promoting me to principal risk director. Stephen noted that my handling of the internal family crisis demonstrated a rare capacity for high-level compartmentalization. Corporate clients managing billions of dollars trust individuals who can navigate catastrophic variables without losing their composure. I had stared down a federal bank fraud conspiracy targeting my own identity. I had faced trespassing extortion and public smear campaigns. Through all of it, I had not missed a single billable hour or miscalculated a single portfolio yield. I signed the new executive contract with a steady hand. The promotion carried a substantial salary increase and equity shares in the firm. The career my father threatened to destroy to save his own fragile ego had instead become my greatest impenetrable fortress. The paradox is mathematically clear. When you stop expending your finite energy trying to fix a broken family, you recover an astonishing amount of capital to invest in your own growth. I know there are people listening to this narrative who are currently standing exactly where I stood a year ago. You are holding a phone, reading a text message from a relative who treats your bank account like a community chest. You are balancing your own tight budget while a sibling or a parent demands you fund their latest self-inflicted emergency. They use heavy loaded words like loyalty obligation and selfishness to blur the hard lines of financial extortion. They tell you that setting a limit makes you a cold, unfeeling person. They promise you that they just need one more loan to get back on their feet. They view your boundaries as an act of treason because your boundaries force them to face the consequences they have spent their lives running from. I need you to hear this truth clearly. Refusing to sponsor their chaos is not a cruel act. It is the first honest choice you can make for your own survival. If someone demands your future to pay for their past mistakes, they do not love you. They are using you to delay their own reckoning. You do not owe anyone a piece of your hard-earned sanity just because you happen to share genetic material. The guilt they try to project onto you is nothing but a manipulation tactic designed to keep the extraction machine running. You have the sovereign right to close the ledger. You have the unassailable right to lock the vault. Later that afternoon, a commercial van pulled into my driveway. A local locksmith stepped out carrying a heavy canvas tool bag. I had scheduled the security appointment a week in advance. The digital keypad on my front door functioned perfectly, but I required a tactile, physical change to close the chapter. I watched from the foyer as the technician unscrewed the old brass hardware, removing the cylinder and the strike plate that had been there since I purchased the property. He installed a high-security commercial-grade deadbolt mechanism cast from reinforced steel. The metallic clicks and the sharp turn of his screwdriver resonated through the quiet entryway. He tested the mechanism twice, packed up his tools, and handed me a single, heavy key. I walked him out and closed the heavy wooden door behind him. I slid the new key into the cylinder and turned it to the right. The steel deadbolt engaged with a satisfying final thud that echoed through the empty hall. The physical perimeter was permanently sealed, mirroring the legal walls I had built around my identity. I stood in my hallway holding the key, feeling the cool metal against my palm. The quiet of the house wrapped around me, offering no judgment and demanding no payments. I had survived the extraction process. I had protected my sanctuary. I had learned the hardest lesson a daughter can learn. Family is supposed to be a safety net, but the moment they ask you to set yourself on fire to keep them warm, it is time to walk away and let them freeze.